Welcome back to Melvin Electronics. I'm Lee and I'm so glad you could join me for today's little adventure. And what we're going to do here today, in Studio B of course, is the, the last big upgrade on the 2009 Mac Pro, lovingly called the Bakersfield computer. And what we're going to be doing today is the brain transplant, the CPU upgrade. Now, I left this for last because it's the most significant upgrade, and personally the most scary. I should be able to do it. I've done it actually 4 times. Once on a single tray, 2010 Mac Pro, and 3 times on dual trays. But there is one significant difference. The only real hardware difference between the 2009 and the 2010. The processor tray. Apple made a decision to experiment by using what we now call delidded CPUs. That is, here is the traditional CPU as it would come from Intel. Note the integrated heat spreader that is attached to the top. Alright, but Apple decided with these machines to try using, as I say, what we now call delidded. That is the same exact processor, but without the integrated heat spreader. And that's the big difference between the two. That's why you cannot put a dual CPU tray 2010 tray into a 2009 or the other way around. They have to be specific to those machines. All right. Now, most people today, now we get them delidded today. Apple simply ordered them from Intel without the heat spreaders, and they would have a certain amount to be able to do repairs as necessary when under warranty. To get them today, you can still get these CPUs pretty easily, actually, but they're all going to come with the integrated heat spreaders. So, you have 2 choices. 3 choices actually. You can put these in, and if you are very careful and very lucky, by not tightening the heatsink too much, or more intelligently, by putting spreaders in on the screws, you can set them to the right height so that the CPUs don't get crushed, because if you tighten them too much, the pins in the back, the pins in the socket itself get bent, and you're never going to unbend them. All right. Now, the other choice is to delid them yourselves. You can get delidding kits, and it's, I understand, a very doable process. You just need to be very, very patient with it. Or you can do as I did and spend the extra bucks and buy them delidded. Now, they're about twice as expensive, but that's what I did. I figure I'm hopefully only going to do this once. All right, now, what else came with the kit? Came with chem pads for cleaning off both CPUs and the heat sinks. And it came with a certain amount of thermal paste. Now the thing is, I have never been trustful of the thermal paste that comes in those kits. People are going to throw something probably pretty cheap in there. So I'm going to use good old Arctic Silver 5 on the process. Other things that I'm going to be using isopropyl alcohol, and lint-free gauze pads. So, that again used, now I will make use of the chem pads, but you know, for additional cleaning, that's the way I usually clean off thermal paste. All right, now what we're going to start out with really is benchmarks. So yeah, we want to get a before and after. So I've got 3 benchmarks that we're going to run. Geekbench, which everybody knows, the somewhat lesser known iBench, and an old favorite, if you've seen a lot of my G4 and G5 videos running benchmarks, Xbench. Oddly enough, the same Xbench that runs in OSs as far back as 10.3 Panther will run on Mojave as well. Curious. So just for the heck of it, I'm going to run all 3 of those before we do the upgrade, and then we'll go at it after we do the upgrade. And if you're interested in seeing the result of all of this, please stay tuned. We'll start out, of course, by looking at about this Mac to see that we are running our original processors, 2 by 2.93 gigahertz quad-core Intel Xeons, which was the high end on this machine. When it was purchased, this was a very, very serious machine, which it certainly is now because we can upgrade it so much. All right. Now, our first in our 3 will be Geekbench. Geekbench 5. Alright, tells us what the machine is. We're going to be running the CPU benchmark, of course. We don't need to run the compute benchmark. The graphics card is going to stay exactly the same throughout the entire thing. So we will certainly leave that as is. Okay, now, running this benchmark with the machine running is, of course, not a good idea. So I certainly have to get out of the screen capture, first of all. Make sure there are no other applications running, and then we can start this. So please stay tuned. Alright, and we have our results. A single core score of 572, not all that great, and a multi-core score, obviously much higher, of 4,349. Interesting enough. Now we can save this. Core CPU test, and that gets saved, so we can now close that, and let's go to our next candidate, iBench. Now I'm not nearly as familiar with iBench, but it is primarily geared just to doing CPU tests. So I guess we shall launch the tests and find out, but of course I'm going to need to stop the screen recording before we do that. So please stay tuned. Alright, our final results are in. By the way, it took Geekbench a little under 1 minute and 40 seconds to run the CPU test. iBench took 1 minute 25.5 seconds, so a little bit more than 10 seconds difference. between the two tests. And our total score here is 6.42. We'll save that. I'll give this the same okay. And that's now saved. Alright. Close out of iBench. And then finally, and oh, by the way, it's kind of interesting what it did. It ran, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different tests, and the files that it needed to create in order to run those tests are here in the desktop. Now, since we've run the tests, we can simply delete them. Alright, and then finally, we'll go to the bottom where it will be. I don't know why this is. The disk images here, you would think that I could just save Xbench. I tried doing that in PowerPC and it would never run unless the entire disk image was open. So I don't know. Maybe this isn't necessary, but let's open up Xbench. Okay. Now, obviously many tests that Xbench can run. We don't need anything but the CPU, so certainly we can run that. However, of course, just as always now, we'll need to end the screen recording. So, stay tuned for the results. Okay, now the interesting thing, I ran through the timing of the different benchmarks. Xbench was almost instantaneous. I clicked start and then bang, here are results. 222.49. Interesting. So, of course, none of these are going to mean all that much until we have something to compare with. We'll be running all 3 of these after. So, I need to clean things up a little bit. We will then shut the machine down and we'll be on to the brain transplant. Stay tuned. All right. I'm always nervous about this. It should be fine. Okay, obviously 2 processors, you have 2 heat sinks. One thing to keep in mind, these 2 heat sinks are not interchangeable. So what I'm going to do is do this one, and then I'll repeat the process on this one. Right, you do need, these are 3mm hex screws in there. They're captive, so they're not going to come out. However, they are recessed, so you need a driver, something like this. Now it goes in, and you've got to get it locked in. And there it is. All right. Do that one. There we go. Turns on each. So this is a little hard to tell if you're actually in. All right. Not quite yet. Still not quite yet. Are we having fun yet? Okay, it's free on this side. That should be free. No more star pattern, of course, because it's completely free over here. There we go. And this is as expected. The CPU is stuck to the heatsink. On the 2010s, the CPUs are actually held into the socket with the clamps. When you take the heatsink off, you've got to pull a little bit more to get it off. All right. And that does come off. All right, so I've got to clean off the heatsink. I'll probably clean the CPU too, although who really cares with this thing because they're not worth all that much. All right, well, let me do that and then we'll be back. Stay tuned. Okay, there is a plastic clip on the old processor. You need to put it on the new processor. This is now firmly set in there. Everything is cleaned off. Okay, I'm sure people will complain that's way too much thermal paste. I'd probably rather have somewhat too much than not quite enough. And why do I just not remember this being this much trouble? Okay. That should be doing it. If you see other videos, you know, this is all time-lapsed. I'm not going to time-lapse it. You might as well get a perspective on what this is like. I don't, it's been a while since I've done this on a 5,1. I don't quite remember it being that tricky to get the heatsink down. Okay, we do seem to be engaged. Now, you will see people doing this with 4,1s, even if they're using delidded CPUs, being hyper cautious about how far this gets screwed down. That's something to worry about really only if you're using the lidded processors. Here, you can screw them down all the way. I would crank them so that you can't get them out again. But certainly tight to the point that they stop turning. All right. So, one down, one to go. Now, I'm going to do the second CPU off camera. You don't need to see me struggling with those screws again. It'll probably be easier having just practiced. So, stay tuned. And here we are. Okay, yeah. The second CPU heatsink did come off more easily. Going back on, I basically just put it on and went right down, and there you go. Tighten to the point where the driver stops turning. Don't try to push it past that. Well, okay. What remains now is to put it back in the machine over here, connect it up, and see if it boots. Stay tuned. And we are up and running. All right. About this Mac. The really good news. 2 by 3.46 gigahertz, 6-core Intel Xeons. Now, the only negative news would be memory here. It's reading the 96 gigs, but at 1066 rather than 1333. Now, you may remember, this is mostly memory on hand that I had here, so it probably is 1066. That can be addressed at a later time. I'm not worried about that really right now. Okay, now, I did run the benchmarks, so there is that. I tried saving the results and did so successfully, but when I went back to look at the results before the upgrade, they wouldn't open. So we'll just go old school here. Okay, on the 8-core 2.93 gigahertz, Geekbench single was 572, multi 4349. That improved dramatically with, after the upgrade, single 676. That's almost 100, it's over 100 points higher, which is certainly very good. And the multi 6952, which is a full 2600 plus higher. So there you go. iBench, now I knew nothing about iBench going into this. I just looked up possible CPU benchmarks. It came up. Oddly, iBench went down. It was 6.42 pre-upgrade, post-upgrade 6.05. Now, any of these benchmarks, of course, can vary widely going from one to another in terms of how many times you run it. That may have been a remarkably high score on the 8 core, and this is a somewhat low score on the 12 core. I'm not worried about that. Xbench, on the other hand, pre-upgrade was 222.49, post-upgrade 247.71. So we're over 25 points higher on Xbench. That was just sort of a lark that I threw in. You know, I've used it so much on PowerPC machines, it just surprised me to note that that same old universal will run here. So, pretty crazy, huh? All right. So I think that's the news. We've got basically our full upgrades. Oh, I did want to say something about the Bluetooth situation and the AirDrop. I AirDropped clips from my phone to this already. It went incredibly slowly. One 4.5 minute clip, a little over, took like 20 minutes to half an hour to go over. So I tried it again, taking the side door off, and it went right in there. So obviously the problem is with the antennas. Now the thing is, I was having this problem on my 5.1 Mac Pros, legitimate 5.1 Mac Pros, and was able to solve it by putting a dongle on. So I've put on a dongle. We'll see in the future if that really helps the situation. But yeah, I mean, just taking the side door off and bang, everything just flew. Okay, now what else? Where we're going to go from here? Well, oddly, you will have already seen that. I actually recorded this entire series of upgrades over a year ago. And, you know, set them on later to go on. I'm really that far in advance, because I figured they weren't time sensitive. Operating system with Mac Pros is time sensitive, so I can't stay on Mojave. As of the time you will see this Mojave will have been out of support for over a year. It is only just ending life now. So, you know, we got to get off and get on something else. So I'm going to try OpenCore Legacy Patcher, and I'm going to try upgrading it probably to Monterey, which, as of the recording, hasn't come out yet. We shall see on that one. But you will have seen that already, because that is timely. And I will have released it. Alright. Be good to other people. They need it and deserve it. Be good to yourselves. Everything good that we do in the world has to start from there. We can make the world a better place. It is not, so please take very, very good and careful care. So, yeah, we have a lot more things coming up. There's going to be PowerPC. I've got a series, short series on sawtooths. And I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of other stuff that pops in too. So, until that material is available on the channel, this has been Broken Electronics.